on those.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar organized by the Calcutta Management Association. Well, ever since the pandemic hit us, we've been trying to do a bit by providing access to senior people from the industry, government, etc. And we had senior professionals who talked about leadership during the crisis. And a lot of them have looked at business and life in general post the COVID era. We have been fortunate enough to have speakers like the chairman of Hindustan Unilever, the chief economic advisor to the government of India, the deputy chairman of the Niti Aayog, government of India, chairman of Hero Motors, Kirloskar, Cummins, and a whole lot of other companies. We have now decided to start a new series titled Management Specials. The focus would now be on providing training and workshops to equip the managers of today to cope with the issues in the post-COVID era. We have therefore decided to focus on the relevance of cross-functional management and online management education as the first of the series. We are fortunate that we have been able to have an arrangement with organizations and individuals who have specialized in these domains to speak to us today. On behalf of all of us, I would like to invite and thank Dr. David Sprott from the Drucker School of Management, Dr. Rajiv from the University of Memphis, and Professor Pradeep Mehra from the Shiv University for sparing time to speak to us on something that we feel is extremely relevant in the present context. Moderating today's session will be our Vice President, Mr. T.V.S. Shenoy, Chief of the New Materials Business of Tata Steel Limited. I'm sure you'll find the session informative and interesting, and therefore over to Shenoy. Shenoy, it's all yours.
Thank you, Amitabh. And just a quick sound check, Amitabh. Voice coming through. And good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to people who are joined in. What a wonderful session to start this year's management education series. Last year, many of you who had joined us would have known that we had a fabulous management series termed as from the leadership perspective. And we had heard many leaders speak on this series. This year, we have got something new, and it's termed as management specials. And what better than to make use of a pandemic? And they say, never let go of a crisis. And here, the Calcutta Management Association is there in terms of delivering to a crisis, and more importantly, how is that we all can learn? Well, what is today's session all about? What is that you're going to gain? We're going to be together for about an hour from here, so it's going to be absolutely power-packed. And let's try to see the relevance of this issue today. Well, different people come with different perspectives. And that's true in work, that's true in school, that's true in colleges, and isn't true in marriage. And what has happened during the past year is the pandemic has brought a totally new perspective, either in terms of leadership, work from home, work at office, education at every levels. And what this session attempts to do is to bring a marriage of both. Trying to build the elements of cross-functional management and also its relevance in today's time, especially when you're often learning or working from home, not in touch with colleagues physically, but mostly mentally. And how do you get the best out of it? And what a galaxy of speakers we have got today. While Amitabh has already introduced Dr. Rajiv Grover, who is the Chair of Excellence, Sales and Marketing at University of Memphis at the US. We also got Pradeep Mehra from the Professor of Practice at Shiv University. And we also got David Sprott from the Drucker School of Management. So fantastic combination of educationists, of practical pragmatists, and also able to bring two together and deliver what we feel is a great cross-valued learning education today. So we got about an hour, as I said. And before I invite Dr. Rajiv Grover to spend his around 15 minutes or so of his sharing of his session, I would like to introduce Dr. Rajiv Grover to all of you. Dr. Rajiv Grover is the Chair of Excellence, Marketing and Sales, University of Memphis at the US. He is also the Honorary Distinguished Professor, School of Management and Entrepreneurship and Academy of Continuing Education at the Shiv Nadar University. He was the Dean of the Fogelman College of Business and Economics, University of Memphis from 2007 to 18. Prior to that, he was a holder of the Terry Distinguished Chair of Marketing and Head of Marketing Department at University of Georgia. After over 40 years of business experience as an executive consultant, academic, and administrator, Rajiv has turned to help steer organizations into making better decisions. He believes that many executives do not possess the stance to make sound decisions that impact multiple functions, stakeholders, and the environment. To this extent, he's developed an online simulation virtual business professional for executives to learn with cross-functional philosophy. Well, apart from this, he's also published plenty of articles, books, and what we're going to hear from each one of them today are nuggets of management education and also nuggets of leadership. And if each one of you are able to take away one or two nuggets at the end of this session, I think your time would have been well spent. Since we're not able to take questions online, my request would be anybody who would like to ask any questions to please type it in the chat box, and I'll try to figure out the time wherein we can pose those questions to Rajiv and then take it forward. If you want to know the homework which has been done in terms of preparing, they always say you prepare your presentation keeping in view what the audience looks like. And the amount of conversations we have had with Rajiv in terms of making this was fantastic. And that's the depth of the preparation one gets. Rajiv, over to you in terms of taking us through for about 15 minutes or so. And then I would lead on to Pradeep Mehra to follow. Over to you, Rajiv.
Thank you, Shinai. Folks, welcome, and thank you guys for organizing this particular session and for the lovely introduction. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, if you could put it in the slideshow mode, Rajiv.
Okay. That will take me another 10 minutes to figure it out. So,
if you go to at the bottom, sir, if you can just at the bottom, I'll help you out, Rajiv. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the fourth icon. It's the fourth icon. Yeah, it's the next one. Yeah, that's right.
There you go. Wonderful. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's why, you know, the older one gets, the more useless one becomes. But Shinai has already given you folks a brief introduction of who I am. And I have also, in addition to what Shinai have said, an MBA, and then I worked with Hindustan Computers at CL now in India. And very early in my life, I started doing executive education, one of the youngest assistant professors to do executive education. And that was at University of Pittsburgh, which had a pretty fine executive education program. And then during the heyday of .com, I came to Silicon Valley, from where I'm speaking right now, to start a company. And then the .com bust happened, and I went back to Georgia with my tail between my legs. But the point of all of what I'm telling you is that I'm one of those academics that has spent a ton of time in the quote unquote real business world. And also all during my academic career, I was a pretty active consultant to large companies and small, including Microsoft, which was the largest at that point of time. And even though my expertise was market research, when I went into the corporations, it quickly sort of developed into being a consultant in a more general level, because I found that, because of these cross-functional conflicts, however good a market research project is done, if the politics is not eliminated, nothing much can be done to implement the insights that the market research project delivered. So, and then also all the compensation systems, people were not cooperating with each other because they were scared that if they cooperated with that guy will get promoted, and on and on and on. So that was all that was sort of prior to my becoming the dean. And when I became the dean and I started hiring now people from across different disciplines, right? And I would be interviewing very, very fine big data people, and they knew a lot of AI and NLP, but they had zero idea on what business was. And not to belabor the point, the same thing happened, that you had very, very fine accountants, you had very, very fine economists, but they had very little idea on the business, how businesses are run. And if you looked at their background, they have an undergraduate in economics and maybe a master's in economics, and then they have a Ph.D. in economics, and then they come into a business school. Same thing with a big data person, might have a ton of statistics experience, but they haven't necessarily had much business experience. They might not even have graduated from a business school, and even if they did get their PhD from a business school, it doesn't necessarily mean that they got a very good grounding of the kind of courses even an MBA does. So the long story short was that we were training students as faculty people in very, very narrow functional areas. So expert in big data, expert in economics, expert in accounting was teaching, quote unquote, the MBAs and the undergraduate students. And if the teacher himself or herself is unaware of the complications in a large business kind of setting, fat chance that this person would be allowed to or will be capable of teaching, business relevant material. And so that just kept perpetuating. The more research oriented business schools became, the lesser the faculty became familiar with the workings of business. So much so that a lot of schools dropped courses called management, and they introduced courses like organization behavior. So organization behavior is more of a science than management is. So we focus and talk about the OB. So my sort of learning in these last 15 years or so, and more when I was a regular faculty member and consultant, was that the pendulum had swung too much into we generating specialists. Now, there's nothing wrong with that model. It's okay to be specialists, and the market is supporting these specialists because they get jobs. So if I know a lot about big data, I have a very good chance of getting a job, much faster than somebody who's a generalist who hasn't, done any special courses or electives in big data or accounting and so on and so forth. But if I keep generating specialists, and that's where I stop as a sort of education ecosystem, then people just cannot grow in an organization. If at all they become sensitive to other functional areas, i.e. how decisions in one particular area impact other area, that is out of their own personal experience or their own personal attitude. And we all know how dysfunctional an organization can be if people at the mid and higher level of management are just focusing on a particular function, or even if they have the responsibility of a general manager, they don't have the wherewithal to make these kinds of cross-functional decision. So with that experience, I said, okay, Rajiv, enough of complaining. What are you going to do about it? Right? So the way the MBA programs were structured, almost the whole of the second half of an MBA program was more or less electives, and ton of stories about 80% of what MBAs learn in a program they never use, right? And what we keep doing in business schools is we keep adding courses, because when we add courses, it is good for us. Whether you need 7 courses in supply chain is not really tested by what the supply chain ecosystem wants, but the 7 courses are designed because it keeps the faculty in a department very well occupied. So there were a lot of inefficiencies. So I said, hey, what do I want to do? What is my major complaint? So one is, like I said, people weren't focusing on cross-functional management. So one of the goals that I had in doing what I'm doing, and I'm going to show you that shortly, is that I wanted to educate my executives in a holistic, cross-functional kind of manner, where we are not saying that the heart is more important than the brain and the stomach is more important than the liver. We have all these departments, all these organs, and they all have to work in a coordinated manner. The other problem is that because of the way the books were written, and I have interacted with publishers, they want more and more pages. And because the more the pages, the more they can sell it at in terms of pricing. Just like a journalist kind of story, if you try reading articles in Business Week or other places, the volume is too much. The journalists are paid by the word. So if they write a 500-page article, they get paid so much. And if they write a 1,000-word article, they get paid twice as much. So what happened was that people were being told stories, examples, and so on and so forth. And people stopped thinking for themselves. So they said, hey, I'm Honda, and I want to do this because Coke did it, or vice versa. They're taking examples. People do not necessarily know how to think for themselves. That was, again, my experience. And just yesterday, Pradeep will vouchsafe for that. We were having discussion with one pretty high-flying entrepreneur, and he kept talking about Rolexes and iPhones, and he was in the fashion business, and he wanted to take stories from iPhone and implement it in the fashion business, and there were a lot of sort of holes in his thinking, because he was trying to copy what iPhone did to build its brand. And what I am here to tell you is that if it works for Honda, it's not going to work for Coke, right? And related to what I said earlier, because of the writings being so verbose, even if people got through, the writings never encourage people to think on their own. So the other thing that I wanted to do was, how can I take the essence of cross-functional management? Obviously, before that, I have to determine what the essence is, and then write it in such a way that I can present it in a very efficient manner. And by doing that, people will also absorb it much better. The other sort of issue that I wanted to overcome was this problem that students constantly kept asking across the board everywhere, where am I learning this? So we would go into a class, teach the theory, and then look for examples for the theory. And for quite a few of mature, experienced MBAs sitting in a class, they are asking, why am I learning this? Where am I going to use it, etc. So I wanted to make the relevancy very, very clear. And we might not be able to get to this today, but to me, having the knowledge is very different from judgment. So judgment, when you're using judgment to make decisions, decisions require judgment. You're basically using knowledge, and you're using knowledge from a bunch of different areas. And I won't get into the details of that today. So to make decisions, you do need knowledge, but the judgment comes in terms of which knowledge to use, how much of it to use, what knowledge is applicable in its further nuanced form, etc. So what I wanted to do was that I wanted to have stuff that was relevant. I wanted people to think, and I wanted people to make decisions after they have thought through. And the only way I could get that done was through a virtual exercise. So I created this virtual business. So people will learn via running a business. So the business is on the computer, and they're constantly making decisions as the business keeps growing. And we'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit. The last couple of problems that I had was that there was enough written about management and leadership styles, if you will. And if you go through the leadership literature, there's a ton of stuff written, right? But there's not much written on followership. How am I supposed to behave as somebody who's following a leader? And probably what is more important is fellowship, i.e., how am I supposed to behave with my colleagues? So what I wanted is that in this exercise, whatever that shape might be, I wanted to communicate how people can be better organizational citizens, i.e., not only are you a great leader, you're also a great follower, and you're also a good colleague, because you will not necessarily become a great leader if you haven't been a good colleague or been a good follower. And finally, as we all know, that there's always this huge luck factor. And if you talk to any humble, accomplished CEO, he or she will always say, oh, I was lucky. And one reason for this person making that statement is that the person is humble. But the fact is, being at the right place at the right time is very, very important. So I wanted to emphasize that also to my students or executives in this particular learning experience. So I've got random events in this particular simulation whose occurrence will either enhance the simulation, the participant in the simulation's performance, or harm the participant's performance. So this next slide has got a sort of a laundry list of what are the sort of issues that impact an organization, and I won't go through this laundry list. So for example, selection of target markets, doing a great comparator environmental analysis, internal analysis of one's capabilities. Long story short, the whole area of strategic positioning, if you will, impact the whole organization. So the point I'm trying to make is it is not the job of a marketing person to strategically position a product or a strategy person to strategically position a SBU. It is a problem that the whole organization as a whole should solve, because it's going to impact the manufacturing area, it's going to impact the supply chains, it's going to impact everything. Same thing with the readiness cost, even though this might sound like it's accounting, but making the whole organization sensitive to the fact that you are existing there to increase revenue and decrease costs in a responsible manner. So how each and every decision you make should ultimately result in an increase in revenue, maybe via customer satisfaction, maybe in the long run, or each and every decision you make should result in cutting costs by minimizing inefficiencies or any other fluff that might have. But in this particular slide, I've listed a bunch of issues, and there are a lot more that are all cross-functional kind of issues. And one of the reasons you will see that not only this slide is very busy, but other slides are so, is that I wanted to make our decks stand alone in case people couldn't attend the seminar and wanted to know what went on. They could look at the deck and get a pretty good idea of what we talked about. So I have a couple of minutes more. So how did I select what is it that I need my executives to learn? So for each major area, let's say business law, I talked to the dean of the law school, I talked to a judge, I talked to practicing attorneys, both in law firms as well as in companies. What are the quote unquote 10 laws that every business executive should know? Same thing with accounting, talk to CPAs, talk to CFOs, talk to accounting professors. What are the 10 concepts every business executive should know, right? And there's a whole lot of stories over here I could tell you, which not only sort of, I want to say, hindered my speed of progress, it also sort of encouraged that there was a need for something of this sort. For example, I couldn't find a single person to help me. I'm not an accountant. I know marketing, I know strategy, I know computers, and a number of these kinds of areas because of my background, but I'm not an economist, I'm not an accountant, I'm not a lawyer, etc. So I needed help in communicating these constructs, because I do believe an expert can communicate more efficiently and obviously correctly than a person who is not having that level of expertise. And I had phenomenal difficulty getting a person to work with me, because every person was so specialized. Every person was so specialized that if you had to put 10 topics, and they included, financial statements like balance sheet, profit and loss, so basic financial accounting. And if you wanted to include some cost accounting topics, if you wanted to include some taxation and some corporate kind of filing, you just couldn't find anybody who could do the whole lot, right? Now, if we can't communicate in a single voice, it becomes very difficult for the student to able to integrate what he or she has heard from multiple different sources, and each one being concerned only about his or her area. Then this whole notion of online delivery, which is part of today's agenda, how am I going to deliver all what I have now decided to include? And as I hinted to you earlier, to me, it had to be an experiential exercise, i.e., you learn much more by being in a situation rather than being far away and learning from textbooks, if you will. And as we will also talk about later, what we are proposing that besides doing this simulation and learning, executives also do a project which should be cross-functional in nature, and that project will be to the liking of the professional in the simulation, and then there's a ton of learning in doing the project. But back to online. So my experiential learning simulation had to be online, and one of the things that I learned from the existing online pedagogy models is that they were basically face-to-face courses that were put online. So in 1995 or so, when I started doing executive education, we were tape recorded on a VCR, right? And the tape was kept available for the person who couldn't attend that session, right? And that person would watch the tape. Now, is that online? Now, if I put that tape on the computer and they can access it from anywhere, does it make online education? So there were huge gaps between, what online was capable of and what it was not capable of, and what we were doing with online education. So my goal also became, besides what we saw in the first slide of holistic relevance, efficiency, etc., and having decided the content, that I would now deliver this content online. So it has taken me 6 years already putting all this content in an experiential way online. But like Shinoy and Amitabh said earlier, the pandemic has actually taught us something. The pandemic has taught us how to work from a distance. And the article below at Forbes magazine, which came out in 2020, basically says that executive education might not return to a classroom at all now. So there's a lot of stuff that is going on in the online world, facilitated by the technologies like Zoom, on which we are. So I'll skip this slide. It is there. I think Pradeep might pick on some of these points about the details of this online delivery of cross-functional management education via virtual business professional. And just these are a couple of comments. Sinu Srinivasan, who just retired from Stanford University, was one of the reviewers of my simulation and my book, which is part of this simulation. The book contains only the sort of textbook kind of information, the theory, the learning concepts, etc. Basically, he said that this is essentially the core of an MBA program, what is covered. And the point I'm making is that cross-functional education, by definition to me, means that you know enough about everything, and enough means that you can engage in meaningful discussions with the specialists. So I'm not saying specialists are not required. I am saying that there's a huge need for a generalist who can talk to everybody. And a generalist needs to know enough about big data, about accounting, about finance, etc., but there will be specialists always in an organization. And instead of spending 2 years in an MBA program, what I have done, by creating these kinds of efficiencies and appealing to people to think, right? I can quote unquote read for 5 minutes and think for a day, or I can read for the whole day. My proposition is reading for 5 minutes and thinking for a day is going to lead to better judgment, better decision making than reading for the whole day. So basically what Sinu says, that this material is ideally suited for smart people. It is not meant for people who are not motivated and who want to be spoon-fed. They will be great in acquiring knowledge, but they won't sharpen their cross-functional skills. And finally, Dean Sprott is with us. He's the dean of the Drucker School. When I started doing this and people started going through the program, they said, but Rajiv, we need something to hang on the wall. And my VB Pro philosophy was quite in sync with Drucker philosophy, and Dean Sprott will talk more about that. And people who sort of go through this management education, cross-functional, get a certificate that I'm displaying just now. So the idea of what I think we are saying over here, in addition, as most of you have already seen, that education is now not necessarily only imparted by universities, right? And you know about these Google certificates and how companies like Google not requiring university degrees and and that's because universities are not moving fast enough. And so we have to find other mechanisms to deliver what we think needs to be delivered. But fortunately for us, Dean Sprott has been such a visionary that he has realized, and he will talk about that the university need to change to deliver, at the business schools need to change to deliver this kind of education and efficiently. Okay, Shinoy, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rajiv. And for all of you who are connected in the session, you have the presentations. I think you already been mailed by Anirban. And any questions at all? I'm seeing lots of questions, Rajiv. I think we're really running behind time. We have just got 20 minutes left. We are planned for an hour. So what I would request, Pradeep, if you can really crunch your session to about 10 minutes, and maybe if question permits, then we'll see how we go after the session. But thank you, Rajiv, for a very enlightening session. And to all of you, I don't think we'll be able to take questions today. We're really running tight on time. And any questions which you have, please put it in the chat box. We will see how we can kind of get back to you on getting it clarified.
I'm sorry, I entered the full screen mode and I couldn't see the clock on my computer. I apologize. It took
Never mind. No, it is absolutely fine. We'll see how we can kind of make up, Pradeep, if you have about 10 minutes of time. But before I do that, it's wonderful to invite and to share what Prof. Pradeep Mehra is all about. So Prof. Pradeep Mehra is Professor of Practice in full professor grade at Shiv University, Delhi. Shiv University is an institution of eminence recognized by the government of India. He was head of departments for strategy and entrepreneurship, chairperson for BMS program, CEO for Atal Incubation Center, member MBA program committee, coordinator experiential learning for MBA. He teaches strategy, negotiations, entrepreneurship, managerial accounting, and VB Pro simulation to undergrads, MBA and executive MBA students. He has conducted an MDP on negotiations at IIM Calcutta and has been a guest faculty at MDI Gurgaon. He has over 3.5 decades of corporate experience, of which 2 decades was at CFO, CEO, and the board level. He has worked in India as well as outside India. His corporate experience and achievements have been numerous. Well, if you have to connect the dots between what Rajiv said and what Pradeep is going to say, is this. Politics is there to stay in an organization, period. I've been with the corporate house for over 3 decades, and it's going to stay. We also heard what Rajiv said. It's not generalists versus specialists. It's how generalists and specialists combine to make a deadly combination. One of the best things ever as a leader you'd have is a team motivated and a team which is well oiled. And Prof. Mehra comes with that experience of being in the industry, of having led it, of having learned from his frustrations, of having beautiful moments. And Prof. Mehra, over to you. My request, if you could crunch a session to 10 minutes and give the tips, it would be wonderful.
I will, Shinoy. And, seeing your Tata batch, reminds me of my, olden days, after IIT Delhi, my first job, as a fresh engineer was in Tata Motors in Pune. Okay, so Tata has a special place in my eyes always.
Thank you, Pradeep. Really good to hear that as well. Over to you.
Yeah, so, yeah, is it now, just checking, is the slide visible now?
Yes, yes.
Fine, good.
You could just blow it up a bit in the bottom right-hand corner, if you could put it in the slideshow.
Bottom right-hand corner only.
That's it.
It's already, I think it's already maximum.
Okay, we'll go ahead with it.
Yeah, it's already maximum. Yeah, so as Shinoy mentioned, I come with lot of corporate experience. Okay, and then now a lot of teaching experience also, because since 2014 I am professor at Nadar University, which is an institution of eminence. So my experience as a corporate and my experience as a teacher, I will touch upon in this talk. And I'll quickly finish, because many of my points have already been talked by Rajiv. So I think, Shinoy, I'll try to finish it in 10 minutes. Yeah, so my experience as a teacher. So we all know that, learning is an individual activity. From our childhood, we know. Our parents say, that you cannot put learning in a spoon and feed us, So from our childhood, we know that we have to study on our own and we work. I mean, that's how we learn. But the classroom is, we go to the class, we meet people because that provides us network, that provides us perspective. That's okay. As a teacher, I realized, both at IIT and IIM, most of the time, our days, it was mostly a lecture-oriented teaching. But now, at Nadar University, as a teacher, okay, I realize that, and fortunately, I'm fortunate that my teaching is liked by all the students. Okay, because I think I realized that the best teaching or best learning happens when a person, okay, I'm calling student, you can call executive or you can call whatever, when a person is actively engaged in the process of learning and self-discovers what is the best. Irrespective of how many times we tell whatever to somebody, the best learning comes when the person himself or herself discovers that learning. So I extensively use, for example, in my negotiation course, I use role plays. So somebody is a banker, somebody is a customer, or somebody is a seller, or somebody is a buyer, or somebody is a HR manager, and somebody is a executive looking for a raise and things like that. Okay. So, and those role plays are merger and acquisition role plays. Those role plays are liked by students immensely, because after that, when we discuss, there's a lot of excitement in the class. And I have seen that when I teach, for example, a case in a strategy course, few people participate. But in role play, at the end of the role play, almost entire class participates with lots of vibrations in the class and lots of excitements. Okay. Similarly, team exercises and simulation, all these various tools that I use as a teacher, I realize that, students definitely feel much more inclined to learn. On the other hand, for example, cases, which is our mainstay. I mean, we of course use Harvard cases and other universities' cases also available on SVSP. The problem with cases is that one, many times they're quite long. Two, discussing them in the class, requires a lot of time, and at the end of it, some learnings come out of it. Okay, and I do realize, I mean, I did not realize it when I was in IIT or IIM studying there, but as a teacher now in Shiv University, I do realize that, English is not our mother tongue. Okay, so while we are good at English, the reading speed may not be that very high. So for many students, to go through the long, lengthy cases sometimes is a torture. So I do use individual simulations in my teaching. Okay, short simulations which are available on purchase on Harvard websites. The problem with the simulation is, in the short ones, is that it takes a long time first to set it up for students to understand what is required to be done, and then that simulation is done and gets over in half an hour. So you spend so much time to understand how to do it, and then you spend only that much time to finish it, actually do it. So it is not very time efficient. On the other hand, the long ones, I have also taught long ones simulations. Okay, and I realized that most of them are team based. So what happens is some students or some participants work very heavily and the others don't. So some are the free riders and some really work. So how do I, as a teacher, I know that whether the person has learned or not learned? The entire team gets the marks based upon their performance. Okay. So that is another point. Teaching in this world now, I realize that all of us, especially the young generations, have too many avenues for time. I mean, we always had, during our days as well. But now it is even much more. But this is a digitally enabled world. So we have WhatsApp, we have social media, and we have so many things that the younger generation actually is much more starved for time. Okay. As a result of that, they don't want to spend a lot of time on verbose texts. I mean, thick texts are there to go through and then to understand what is the substance of it. So why not tell the substance itself? Okay. And as Professor Glover pointed out, that executive education now, okay, is not going to return in a full-fledged face-to-face kind of a teaching. It will be more or less self-learning with some mix of classroom interactions and guidance. Classroom cannot be avoided, but at the same time, should not be avoided, because it provides means for interaction, questions, networking, others' perspective, not only your perspective but others' perspective. Yes. So that was my experience as teacher. Now I tell about my experience as a CEO. Okay. So as a CEO of a company, because 2 decades I was at a CXO C-suite level. Okay, 2 decades is a long period. I realized that an R&D, for example, my R&D head, he was gem of a person from IIT Kharagpur. Okay, but for him to understand, finance was not an easy proposition for me. Okay, I had to actually many times take him, explain him. Okay, so this is the problem that happens throughout. That for getting a job, we get specialists. Okay, specialists in accountancy, specialists in whichever field that they are. But the moment they get promoted to middle level or higher levels, I mean, they are required to have a perspective of other disciplines as well, other functions as well. All of them need to know how to do a budgeting, for example, okay, or legal compliances, brand building, employee compensation. Making of a business plan is almost like a routine exercise that everybody has to do, irrespective whether somebody, accounts people only just call it. I have been in finance function. My first 15 years, 1.5 decades was in finance when I finally became a CFO. But what was my job there? My job was to call it. The business plan had to come from the functions. So functions have to understand the business plan. Okay. So this has always been a problem for me. And as a teacher, as I mentioned, that I realized that, students need to understand full-fledged cross-functional ideas. So as a teacher, when I start teaching, for example, managerial accounting, cost accounting, for example, okay, I realized that, if I simply teach the techniques, they're not sufficient. The cost accounting and management accounting is very fundamental to business. Okay, so I needed to provide the business context. Okay, similarly, strategy, entrepreneurship, of course, it provides us the breadth. But the problem with entrepreneurship teaching is also that, we have specialized it further, like entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial finance, entrepreneurial marketing, and things like that. Okay. So recently, when we came across this simulation virtual business pro, okay, and our dean told us, all the faculty members about this possibility, I went through it. Okay. And believe me, no other faculty member said yes to it, because as Rajiv said, everybody is a specialist. Somebody is a specialist in finance, all the faculty members. So, and I was the only one who actually was looking for the breadth. Okay, so therefore I said yes. I went through the entire simulation myself, and I really liked it, because even for me, who has kept himself updated with the academic part, there was so much to learn even for me. Okay. Initially, I thought that, I will be able to quickly finish all the questions, all the answers, etc. But soon I realized that, it is not like that. Okay. The one important thing is that these learning concepts, the book, okay, is written in such a concise manner that not a single word is wasted. So you cannot do a book fast reading, you have to read it properly to understand the learning concepts. Okay. And to understand whether you have learned it or not, there's a test your knowledge questions, almost like 600 questions are there. And then one has to make decision-making choices. So what happens in this simulation is actually a person who is of middle ages, who is passionate about cooking, starts his own restaurant. And initially he has to take many decisions like, what price, what quality, what kind of service, etc. And later on, as the business starts growing, the entrepreneur starts taking more and more decisions, many more decisions. And so there are totally 6 stages. So by the end of the stage 4, which is the middle or half of the entire simulation, okay, the entrepreneur goes for a VC funding. And then at the end of stage 5, the entrepreneur goes for an IPO, public issue. And in stage 6, which is the last one, the entrepreneur goes for becomes a global international business. So almost from nil to becoming a global business. In this storyline, the simulation covers almost all aspects of business. So, I mean, it is more than an MBA in many matters. It's in some matters, it is a mini MBA. Okay. And the decisions that are taken, okay, as a teacher now I have taught this course to MBA, I have taught this course, this simulation to undergraduate students. Okay, so I realized the kind of questions that are raised. Okay. Very interesting, very interesting. And in the end, this simulation, when the students get to know their own business personality, I'm using the word business personality in a loose manner. Basically, it is your value system, how you go about it. Like, are you a maintenance kind of a person, a status quo kind of a person, or are you a person who is looking for innovations? Means you are thinking out of the box and breaking from the box, out of the box. Or are you in a delivery kind of a person, in the sense that, your focus is on, what are my deliverables and how should I achieve it? Or am I a people kind of a orientation that, I will be more concerned about my team or my people? Well, to some extent, delivery may suffer, or so that I will be fine with. So it depends. All of us are like that, whether we are delivery person or a people person, whether we are maintenance person or innovation person, whether it is a self person, I am promoting only myself, or whether I keep in focus my organization focus also. What organization wants or what I want. I want promotion. Okay. So whatever organization want, should myself be secondary or should myself be primary? Similarly, profit. Should I have a profit focus or should I have a balanced focus? I take care of all stakeholders, including environment, etc. So when you see where you stand, and when you also see where the rest of the cohort of your batch stands, you really get to know about you in contrast with others, or the group average. Okay. It gives a very good understanding of that. See, for my personally speaking, I would say in these 4 decades that I have graduated out of IIM Calcutta in 1981, and now it's 2001. Okay. All of us know that we have to keep ourselves updated. Okay, some of us may not have a formal management education. We need to understand all the aspects. Many of us may have formal management education, but if you look back, 40 years ago, what we learned, and now what we teach as I teach now, so much difference. Okay, almost very little is common. Okay. So many changes have happened in last 40 years in management world. So we have to keep ourselves updated. We have found this simulation so exciting that our Shiv University, which is an institution of eminence, that now we have made it a part of our core curriculum for all our students of management, whether it is MBA, whether it is executive MBA, whether it is undergraduate, whether now even for online MBA we are going to start. The simulation stories in this simulation are very, very engaging. Okay, when you see the storyline that a person starting with a restaurant and becoming an international global business, it is very, very engaging. So I suppose this is what I wanted to say. And Shinoy, I think I have taken more than 10 minutes. Sorry. I tried my best, but sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you, Pradeep. I think it's been wonderful to hear you. And as you were mentioning the points about how one does in the corporate life, and I had a very interesting anecdote I could sense, Pradeep, and this comes from corporate education. So not everybody is lucky and who are listening in to have a formal education. Many of you who would have perhaps passed the 30s or who are really good in talent, scouting for a training program to upgrade your skills, you will say, what next? What is there for me? What does the company provide? Let's connect what the dots which Rajiv said and what Pradeep said. Let's look at it and see what does it mean for us. In an organization, there is a need for specialists, there is a need for generalists. Specialists typically won't have a chance to have done a formal MBA. Generalists, by the nature, would have done an engineering or graduation and done an MBA and then grown up the organization. Specialists would be typically engineers who would have gone to the shop floor and then risen up. But what next for each of the specialists? How do they work in a cross-functional manner in a team? What options are there? Perhaps not so many in the earlier days, but this pandemic has thrown a fantastic opportunity of online course learning, which was not possible. Well, by the way, let me tell you, the last 1.5 years, I've been to my office 3 days. Today, while my office is in Tata Center in Kolkata, I've come for a customer visit based out of Baroda. And I'm having this session based on Baroda, how connectivity has improved. Seamless and hence an opportunity to learn. Well, What did we hear from Pradeep? Let's look at it. Role plays, individual simulations, self-learning. If there are platforms available for one to develop and grow, if there's a need for people to work in a cross-functional manner and not got have an opportunity to do a formal education, what does it offer? Well, there are exciting opportunities, as you have heard. And for all of you who are keen, I'm sure you can reach out to the CMA Secretariat and see how we can build on your skills as you go across. And it's never too late to have a formal MBA education. I know some of my phenomenal colleagues would have done it pushing age of 40. Some of them doing his PhD at the age of 55 is not very uncommon, but even some of them as young as who are 30s. So there's an opportunity for all. Well, it's up to you how one can kind of pluck it. Well, before I move on, I know we have gone tight on time, but I would request, if at all, the next session is going to be really exciting from David Sprott from the Peter F. Drucker School. But let me tell you an interesting quote from none other Peter Drucker. No institution can possibly survive if it needs geniuses or supermen to manage it. It must be managed, or it must be organized in such a way as to be able to get along under a leadership composed of average human beings. And that is a wonderful Drucker quote. And to tell us more about the cross-functional management and in the Drucker style, I'd like to introduce David Sprott. David Sprott is a Henry Hwang Dean and Professor of the Marketing in Peter F. Drucker and Masatoshi Institute Graduate School of Management, and is on faculty of University of St. Gallen, Switzerland. His research interests include retailing, branding, influence strategies, and marketing public policy. He received his PhD in marketing from the University of South Carolina and earned a BA in business and MBA from Kent State University. Prior to his arrival at the Drucker School, Sprott served as a professor of marketing and dean of the College of Business at the University of Wyoming. At UW, he led a renewed strategic vision, embracing the students' experiences, quality academic research, and economic engagement of the state. Previously, Sprott served on the faculty at Washington State University for more than 2 decades and held the Boeing, Scott, and Linda Carson Chair of Marketing, among other leadership positions. He was a recipient of Outstanding Faculty Research Award from the WSU College of Business. Well, again, for all those who are tuned in and significant numbers listening in here, you have heard academicians, you have heard professors, you have heard industry professionals, and now let's hear David Sprott. Over to you.
Thanks very much. No, I appreciate that. And let me share my screen. There we go. So, can you hear me, and is it in presentation mode?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Well, I'll keep this brief, I promise. I'll try not to go too fast, but it's really a pleasure to be able to interact with you virtually this evening and this morning here in California. So I'm sitting here in Claremont, which is where the Drucker School is, and I just recently joined. I've been here just slightly over 3 months. I'm into my first 100 days, just barely. And, you know, the Drucker School is a little bit different than a lot of business schools. And I was going to spend more time telling you about the Drucker School. I'm going to go quickly here. In general, the thing that is different about us is that we really focus on management as a focus on humanistic inquiry and development, very much like the quote that Shinoy just mentioned. And that we really focus not only on the business skills that people need, but also to think about how does the business fit within a broader organization and within society. You know, Peter Drucker, who anchored the school and began it basically 25 years ago, was really kind of the philosophic underpinnings of what we do here. And Peter passed away in 2005. I never had the chance to meet him, but I can tell you, walking in the hallways and walking around this town, you know, Peter still has an impact in all that we do and all that we think. Most of his work actually was written while he was here in Claremont after he moved from New York University in the 1970s. And I forget exactly the number, but like 65% of his work was written after the age of 60. So to Shinoy's point, you know, the kinds of things we do can be for anyone at any age. And I think that's really exciting and the things we really need in today's world. So the one thing that Peter really talked about a lot and kind of tried to show us was that management is going to help us create a better society and better organizations, and that, you know, people need to be able to find meaning within their work. You know, we spend as much time in the office and with coworkers as we do at home in many ways. And I think the kind of society that we have now and many of the young people that are coming on board really want to see how we can do things differently. And, you know, the influence of Drucker has really always been there. I don't know if you can see that graph very well. I know that they've the slides have been shared. But if you take it that blue line, that's the influence of in a textual analysis of Peter Drucker compared to a lot of other luminaries that you've heard of before, Phil Kotler, Daniel Kahneman. And, you know, why has that line of Peter shot up? I mean, first of all, he was brilliant in being able to distill observations into quotes like Shinoy just used. You know, the idea that you can kind of distill the things about customers and abandonment and all sorts of things down into easily consumable text, I think, has been part of it. But beyond that, the things that Peter talked about, which I have a few listed here, being responsible to society, you know, focusing on innovation, the idea that if you're going to manage other people, you better be able to manage yourself, the fact that we're dealing with people and we need to understand that. All those dimensions of the philosophy of Peter Drucker are as important today as they are when he wrote them, you know, pre-2005. One of the things, and this is the focus of the talk today, is the idea of cross-functional business. Peter had a very strong view that business should be treated as a liberal art, that it should be transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and really draw on a lot of different dimensions. And as an example, so I'm sitting here in Claremont, California. There's a private school here that's part of our consortium called Pomona College, very high-end, elite sort of private school. And in addition to teaching management courses here at the Drucker School, Peter also taught the history of Japanese art at Pomona College. Just a small example of how, you know, we should really think very broadly about what we do in business, and it's something that we try to do here. I'm going to skip over this slide real quick. You can read it as I talk and set up the next comment. And one of the things that I've been doing since I've got here with my board of advisors is to start to get a better understanding of where is higher education going and where is business going in the next, you know, 1 to 2 decades, with the idea of how do we put together programming and materials that are going to help students of any age to be able to perform. And we put together what we're calling a future of work exercise with a number of trends at the macro level, worldwide level, in business, in California, because we live and operate here, as well as in higher education. And I just want to share with you a couple of the takeaways we've had from these results. I'd be happy to share the full slide deck on this if anyone's interested. This was from a variety of consultants, business advisors, and our faculty. And as you take a look at these big issues that we're trying to tackle as business people, how do we maintain an appropriate work-life balance? You know, we're all calling in from home. You know, I'm sitting in my kitchen table island right now to do this. And, you know, how do we balance the idea that, you know, I got a refrigerator right next to me and I'm going to be on a meeting at the same time? How do we handle migration of talent all over the world? Technology, if you haven't noticed, isn't slowing down any. We've got big data everywhere. We have Internet of Things. We have self-driving cars. You know, we've got nationalistic tendencies in a lot of our cultures that we're pushing, that's pushing against globalization, which for me is very sad because I'm an international guy. We need to think about how do we retrain and reskill our workforces. And these big issues, before we got on, I was talking to your president about, you know, he was saying there's a lot of rain in Calcutta, and boy, there's not a lot of rain in California right now. We have forest fires, and empty reservoirs and people worrying about where water will come from. My point in bringing all of these up is not to depress you, but to show that, number one, first, I believe that business can attack and help address many of these issues. But if we're going to do that, we're going to have to do it in a comprehensive manner. And this is my last slide and kind of my end point, and I even put it in red font, is I really believe that we need to have multiple approaches to deal with these very complex issues. We will need the data scientists, we need engineers, we need accountants, but what we really need in society, not just in business, but I believe in society, is that holistic approach that Peter Drucker argued to try to deal with the issues it faces. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Shinoy.
Thank you. Thank you, Sprott. I think it's been a wonderful and crisp and precise presentation in true Drucker style. And you know what, as you were saying, I just picked up a quote again from Drucker, and says, knowledge has to be improved, challenged, and increased constantly, or it vanishes.
Yes.
And now let's connect all the three presentations together. And for all the 180 of you who are there, I'm getting lots of questions. I'll try to pick up a couple of them who have messaged as well. One of the key things which comes about from here, one of the questions which comes about here is, there are plenty of options in the US which is going about in inculcating cross-functional management. If we had to do the same in India, how would you do it during these days? Sprott, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I'll give a good try of it. Sure, I think that's an interesting question. You know, there's obviously, so I do some work in international business, mainly on the educational side, but my sense is that many of the issues that are at the function, and not to suggest to say here, I'll start off by saying I don't think there's one size fits all, but I do think that many of the principles of cross-functional business will work in many different cultures. You know, you do have to consider the context in which you're in when you think about applying such principles. But the basic ideas of many industries in terms of the role of data, the role of you know, technology, human resources, those are all fairly you know, they're ties that bind all of us together as humans and as business leaders. But the important thing is you have to adapt those things to the culture and the context in which you're in. Not to quote more Peter Drucker, but since I'm the Drucker Dean, I'm allowed to do it. You know, one of his famous quotes is "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And I think that that's very true, you know, that if you don't consider the culture in which you're in, then you can be as strategic as like, but it's not going to help you very much. I'm sure that Pradeep and Rajiv have much more insights on how to apply it in India, but my general takeaway is that some of these big macro principles should be applicable in most any business, with culture considered, of course.
You know, Sprott, I think the fact that you said the culture is strategy for breakfast, and for all of you who are connected here, I think very, very powerful quote. And I have seen it and experienced it myself. You might have the best of the strategies, but lo and behold, you will not know what's going wrong until you know your culture well. And I think these are the nuances. The difference between good and great leaders are leaders who are able to manage cross-functional teams well, manage leaders who have to manage future leaders with seniority as well as specialists. Not an easy task to do, is easier said than done. And I'll perhaps pick up another quote. If you want something new, you have to stop doing something old. And one is never too old to get into education. So again, use this opportunity for anyone who has got that. There is something which you have to, when you go to bed at night, or when you reflect back at every Saturday night, you reflect back and say, hey, did I do something new this week? Did I learn something new this week? What are the opportunities has one got to do this week? Right? It works wonders. It helps what a North Star is. I have another question, Pradeep, for you. Pradeep, it says that you said that you had lots of frustrations, but you also had wonderful experiences in online learning. Pradeep, so how did you find in these days, especially when you have online learning, but most of it earlier, the pedagogy was always one-to-one or one-to-many physically. Do you see the quality of training diminish in an online platform? Pradeep, this question is...
Yes. So I would say that, a proper mix is the best answer. Okay, there are advantages and there are pluses of the online system, but there are also advantages and pluses of the offline system. So a good combination, especially for executive education, I would say that a good combination or a good mix of the two is definitely a better thing. But those who cannot afford to be on the face-to-face kind of a thing at all, okay, online is absolutely is not a bad solution at all nowadays, because now for 1.5 years that we are teaching our students, classes are going on, okay, and all on online, like Microsoft Teams and Zoom and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so the response from the students is not diminished. I mean, you're worrying that our students may not find this method good or useful, but it has. I mean, it has worked well. So the pandemic has really opened new vistas for all of us, actually.
The new paradigms of education as new paradigms of the workplace.
Yes.
And as I said earlier, in the last 1.5 years, I've been to office thrice, and for all the 3 times, it's just because my laptop had conked off and I needed to change my battery. It was not for anything else. So seamless it has to be. It has to be. This is another question coming up for Rajiv, and it is perhaps connecting with what Pradeep said. Rajiv, this question is for you. It says, well, it is one thing, as Pradeep, you mentioned that it is not diminished, but self-learning, and most of the times you learn from others. Cross-functional management is also about having different people in a team and learning from others. But when you are supposed to do an online education, how do you learn from others? It's not as seamless as one would have learned and had a cup of tea or put a shoulder around the back of a colleague or a part of other competition or whoever. In this age, why will this be effective? Question, Rajiv, to you.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a question of habit, right? So we were used to picking up a cup of coffee, going to a cafeteria, drinking and talking and learning. The point over here, if you see, the main thing is what you're saying is listening, right? So when you're listening to what the other person is saying, you are learning, right? But here the example you're using is physical contact, and that was habitual. If you start doing this now online and you get to learn by listening to people online, suddenly you will find at one point the balance has tipped. You'd rather do it online than go meet the person physically. So clearly, if everybody is in the hallways in an organization building, there'll be automatic interaction and there'll be the serendipity and learning there. But given that once you get comfortable with interacting over Zoom and such, I think the same amount of learning can be done, and in fact, more efficiently. And I have grown in these last 1.5 years by interacting with my students only online. And earlier I had, difficulty. Students had difficulty. Now all of us are so much more comfortable with these technologies that we prefer doing it online than meeting face to face. So it will just take a few more months maybe for people to get comfortable with that, but I'm absolutely certain that it will catch up. Whatever drawbacks Pradeep is talking about will remain drawbacks no more.
Lovely. Rajiv, I'm reminded of India, 130 crores, bulk of it staying at villages where people don't have a laptop or a computer, but still we have fantastic quality education being delivered and people adopting to this. I still remember my school, and if you go back to Karnataka and the natives, the primary school teachers were trying to teach those lovely small little students, and using the digital mode, I think we're able to do wonderfully well. And here again, for all of you are connected, it's not too late to learn. I think that's a message coming up loud and clear. Another aspect which Rajiv, I think, which you mentioned is the serendipity of meeting talent. I think the chances of meeting better talent globally is far more better in a call like this. Otherwise, perhaps we wouldn't have ever met Rajiv or Pradeep or Sprott for an evening today. Where would we have got a Drucker school prof coming and teaching us? Where would we have got this? I think those are the pluses of education, and especially of online education, and wherein we share knowledge not within the company but within the globe. You've got the best of the world to leverage on, and I think this has opened up vistas for each of us to learn from the best in the globe. I think that's a beautiful way for us to do it. But more importantly, for all of you who are perhaps not so experienced in the net and your laptops and mobiles, you get used to it, because this is the new normal. And the faster we get used to it, I think is better. My mom, who's still in the village, 80 plus years, wonderfully calls me on WhatsApp video calling, or even sends me at times songs. I wonder, well, it's all about learning new. Thank you, Rajiv, and thank you, Pradeep, and thank you, David. I think we have a wonderful session today. There are plenty of other questions coming in, but I think we'll need to take a pause. And I'd request Anil, our treasurer of the Calcutta Management Association, to propose a vote of thanks. Anil, over to you.
Yes. Good evening and good morning, respectively, because we are talking across continents, across time zones. So, Dr. Sprott, really appreciate you waking up in the morning and spending time with us. Similarly, Dr. Grover, you are also in the US. And Professor Mehra and the rest of us, of course, are here. So really appreciate. I think we've actually discussed a very, very relevant subject today. And embedded in it has been certain innovation related to technology. The technology I'm talking of is online access, online means of working, and the need of the hour that really is there for a growing country like India, in which we are saying that we like to be at the forefront of the world's superpowers in the next maybe 10, 20 years, is how to manage our business more effectively. And cross-functional management is going to be the need of the hour, whether we like it or not. So this program is extremely relevant for all of us. And the beauty of technology is that we don't have to travel anywhere to attend this program. We can attend this program sitting in the comfort of our homes, at our own convenience, and get educated by the best in the world. Peter Drucker, of course, has been the father of modern management, so to speak, and the philosophy that Dr. Sprott has shared is so relevant. Although Peter had expounded it many years ago, the responsibility to society, humanistic management, innovation and change, and self-management. These four things are the cornerstones of management, which we speak about and aspire to get even today. Although these things were expounded about 20 years ago, like Dr. Sprott shared with us. So really, it's so relevant. And that is why Peter Drucker was called a visionary, because visionaries will say things which are relevant for all time to come. It's not really a flavor of the season or, a short-term trend or a thought. And like Dr. Sprott said, we need to think about our own vision of what education will look like in the next maybe 10 to 20 years and how the education will be delivered. And I'm of a strong view that education will be delivered offline, education will be delivered in a combination of physical and online modes, as a result of which we'll have access to many more occasions like this in which we can access the best faculty in the world, like we're doing today. I also wanted to thank Rajiv for taking us through the evolution of how he sort of arrived at this model many, many years ago, and how relevant it is today. The cross-functional aspect, and further accelerated by the fact that it is now done in an online mode. Really very, very relevant. And similarly, Professor Mehra, thank you for sharing your experience in the corporate world as well as a professor, and also sharing with us certain overview of what the simulation exercise will look like in terms of a small restaurant owner, how he emerges as a big and a successful owner of a global business. So that really was very, very interesting. I wanted to thank all the participants who have been with us, although we've overshot the time, and really appreciate all the feedback that we will get. And as Shinoy was saying that we will address those questions and revert to the concerned people. Thank you very much. And over to you, Shinoy.
Thank you, Anil. Thank you, Anil. And for all the people who have joined in, and if you all have any other parts, please mail in to Anirban, who is our General Manager at the CMA, for any questions. I'm sure you'll get it. You'll get the presentations also on board. And for all of you who are interested in knowing a bit more about management education and online management education, please do send a mail to the secretariat in the response which you have got, or in the chat, and we'll get back to you. Thank you again, David, Pradeep, Rajiv. Have a great morning there. And for all the people connected in India, have a good evening, and till we look forward to the next session, signing off from the CMA. Thank you, and
thank you, Shinoy. Thank you, Amitabh.
Thank you, and good night and good morning.
Bye.